Hi, my name is Namitha Kapa of the Youth Advisory Board with the Children's Science Center. I'm a senior at Briarwoods High School in Loudoun County, and I'm here to introduce you to Dr. Vint Cerf, Vice President and Chief Internet Evangelist with Google. Dr. Cerf is one of the fathers of the Internet as a co-designer of the TCP and IP protocols and the architecture of the Internet. He has received numerous awards that include the National Medal of Technology, the Turing Award, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and is an inductee of the Internet Hall of Fame. Lucky for us, he lives right here in Northern Virginia, and we are honored to have him as our guest. During our conversation, Dr. Cerf will discuss his background and career, as well as insights on the future of the Internet and technology. Welcome, Dr. Cerf.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate the invitation. I'm looking forward to our chat.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I know you're a very busy man, so we'll get right on with the questions. So my first question for you is, you've had a very interesting and impactful career and are known as the Internet pioneer and father of the Internet. But before we talk about your journey, please tell me about what you're currently doing at Google and describe your Chief Internet Evangelist position at Google for me.
So first of all, this is an interesting title that I did not ask for. When I joined the company 15 years ago, Larry and Eric and Sergey said, well, what title do you want? And I said, how about Archduke? Yeah, that sounded like a great title. And so they went away and they came back and they said, you know, the previous Archduke was Ferdinand and he was assassinated in 1914 and it started World War I. Maybe that's a bad title to have. Why don't you be our chief internet evangelist? And they said, okay, I could do that. So this is a job that we've been making up as we go along. I started in the research group and stayed in that group for quite some time. Then I moved over into the policy organization because a lot of what I do, which is to try to get more internet built all around the world, does involve policy setting at both the national and international level. And then recently, in January, I moved over into the Google Cloud operation in order to help them grow their public sector business, which is business with the federal government, the state and local. So I moved around in the company over that period of time. In terms of how I spend my days, it used to be that I traveled 80% of my time. So 3 weeks out of 4, I would be on the road, off and out of the country. In fact, the first 3 months of this year, I was in London 3 times. But by the time I got back the 3rd time, I picked up COVID-19 and I haven't traveled since mid-March. So here it is, beginning of September or nearly so. So my normal days now are sitting in my basement office, which is where I am right now, doing a whole lot of video conferencing when I'm not doing email.
Got it. Great. Thank you so much. And so I also know that in addition to working with Google, you've also been working with NASA on an interplanetary internet project. Could you also describe this project in this role? I think that's so fascinating.
It really is fascinating. Without trying to give you the entire history, the program started in 1998. The Pathfinder lander on Mars succeeded in arriving in 1997 after a 20-year hiatus. The last 2 successful missions were the 2 Viking landers that arrived at Mars in 1976. So 20 years go by, nothing works. The Pathfinder lands, and several of us got together at the Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena, California in the spring of the following year, in 98, and asked ourselves, okay, what should we be doing now that we're going to need 25 years from now? And we concluded that designing an interplanetary backbone network in order to help both manned and robotic space exploration would be an important thing to do. And of course, here it is nearly 25 years later. And indeed, that's what we've done. We designed a new set of protocols. We tried to use TCP/IP, and we discovered very quickly that the round trip times in interplanetary distances are so huge that the protocol didn't work. You know, between Earth and Mars, it's 20 minutes round trip. It's 20 minutes one way and 40 minutes round trip time when we're farthest apart in our orbits. So we had to design a suite of protocols that we call the bundle protocol, which deals with delay and disruption in an interplanetary environment. So we've been refining those protocols. The prototypes are actually on Mars now on the rovers, Spirit and Opportunity, and the orbiters, relaying data back to Earth through the Deep Space Network. We're also on board the International Space Station with the most recent version of the protocols, which have now been standardized by the Consultative Committee on Space Data Systems, which is a UN organization made up of all the spacefaring nations. So we're in the process of those protocols have now been standardized, and we anticipate that they'll be in use in the Artemis project, which is the American return to the moon, and the Gateway program, which is adjacent to that. So we're all very excited about reaching the point where we can begin to deploy the beginnings of an interplanetary backbone, which will grow over time, because as new missions get launched and as the spacecraft complete their scientific missions, they can be repurposed as nodes of an interplanetary backbone. So this will just grow over the decades and the rest of this century.
Yeah, perfect. Like, I'm in awe of how you were able to see like 25 years in the future and anticipate what the world needs and at that time. And so that leads me to ask, like, how do you anticipate like and foresee changes needed in your industry? And like, what excites you about the future of your industry and what concerns you?
Well, first of all, I want to borrow something that, oh gosh, I'm going to draw a blank on a name, Alan Kay. Alan Kay is known as having said that if you want to predict the future, the best way to do that is to invent it. And so rather than trying to predict, quite honestly, my colleagues and I try to invent and create the future. And so in terms of the interplanetary backbone, we actually thought it would be a good thing to have as opposed to simply predicting that we would need it. And we assumed that its existence would cause interest in interplanetary exploration to increase because the facility is there and infrastructure is there in order to support it. If you think about the internet, it's the same sort of thing. It's a gigantic infrastructure. It continues to grow. We still have about half the world's population to connect to the net. The other half is already there. But all kinds of new businesses have grown as a consequence of that infrastructure. And so rather than anticipating or predicting, we simply create a fertile environment for the future to unfold. And so from my point of view, this sort of work is an enabling kind of activity. And enabling is a very rich kind of career to have. If you enable other people to do things that they couldn't do otherwise, you will have made something beneficial for everybody. And so I feel that way about the internet.
Well, yeah, I think especially for this generation, sometimes thinking about the future can be a very scary thing. And so from hearing from a STEM champion like yourself saying about how you, rather than you invent the future yourself, I think that's really outstanding. And that speaks to the youth very much so. And so did you have a passion, so digging into your past, did you have a passion for technology when you were young? And was there like a pivotal moment or personal experience when you said, this is what I want to do?
Oh, actually, the answer is yes. Ironically, when I was in fifth grade, I would have been 10 years old at the time, and that would have been 1953, which is probably hard for any of your colleagues to even think of. It sounds like it's around the Civil War. I got several things happened that year. First of all, I got bored with the fifth grade math, and I complained about that, and they gave me a seventh grade algebra book. So I spent the summer going through all the algebra problems, and I really loved it, especially the word problems, because it was like a little Agatha Christie mystery, figure out what's X. So I enjoyed the math very much. And I got a chemistry set that year, and back then you got some really cool chemicals that you don't get today because they probably don't think they're safe. But some of these things were hypergolic. You mix them together and they blow up. So I had a great time with the chemistry set. And I was pretty convinced. I remember reading a book called The Boy Scientist and another book called Microbe Hunters by Paul de Kruif, which is about people looking at bacteria, discovering bacteria. So by the time I was 10, I knew I was going to be a scientist of some kind. I didn't know what kind. For a while, I thought I was going to be a particle physicist or something like that, but I ended up taking mathematics classes at Stanford, and then I learned to use computers around the same period of time, and got so excited about that, I stuck with computing, went to work for IBM in 1965, and then returned to school in 1967 at UCLA, where the ARPANET project was funded by the Defense Department, by the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and that sucked me into networking. And I've been trapped in that space ever since. Not that I'm complaining, it's a great place to be.
Yeah, that's great. We've talked to some students and we wanted to find an engaging way for them to encourage them to go back and review materials. And so that's something do you have any thoughts on that? Like, is there anything we can?
Well, I can tell you that the best way to learn anything is to try to do something. And if it doesn't work, you learn from that experience. In fact, most scientists learn more from stuff that fails than they do from stuff that succeeds. Because if you have a theory, for example, and then you do an experiment to test the theory's predictions, and if it turns out that what you measure doesn't match the predictions, then you have to guess either that you messed up the experiment or there might be something wrong with the theory. And so you learn something from a failed experiment, either to do it better next time, or maybe you have to revise the theory. And it's very, frankly, if you've had a theory for a long time that you've hung on to, and then your experiments tell you that it doesn't work anymore, it's really hard to give it up. But think about Einstein in 1905, when he wrote his four, spectacular, miraculous papers, basically blowing up Newton, who had served us well. We'd made tremendously useful predictions from Newton's theory, but we discovered as we approached extremes, like getting close to the speed of light, Newton's theory doesn't work anymore. It doesn't work in the absolute, Einstein doesn't work in the absolute small either. When you get down into quantum conditions, Einstein's theory doesn't work. So this giving up of your favorite theory in favor of understanding something better may be hard, but it's important. So my sense right now is that students will relate more quickly to something if they actually are trying to do something. It's whether it's an experiment or assemble something, or even just analyzing something, as opposed to reading about science. You should do science. That's the best way to learn.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the Children's Science Center's mission, is just to keep these kids engaged with experiments and all of that. Because I have to say, like, I know I shouldn't be saying this in front of a STEM champion, but I did not like science growing up. I really did not. And I think a part of it, I have to say, is just because my elementary school, we did not do experiments that much. It was mostly just like lessons, something on the like something on like the smart board or something. And so I just really did not like it. I found it was so boring. But then flash forward to like high school, middle school is when we started to doing more science experiments. And I remember one of my favorite experiments to this day, and it's such a popular one. It's like extracting the DNA from a strawberry, and like they put it over like a necklace or something. And so that was the first time that I've actually been like, whoa, like science is actually kind of cool. And it came from that hands-on experiment. So I think that really speaks, and that's what we're trying to do at the Children's Science Center.
No, I couldn't agree more. This is the thing that really excites me, is trying, predicting something and then either having it come out right or having it come out wrong. I remember I did one experiment where I measured the speed of light and I came out with a number that was twice as fast as it should have been. And I remember thinking, well, maybe I'll get the Nobel Prize because I just figured out the speed of light is different from what everybody else thought it was. But it turned out I made a mistake in one of my calculations.
Got it, yeah. So with that, so what obstacles or challenges did you face when pursuing your passion?
Well, the networking, of course, has been the center of my career. Getting the internet off the ground was a significant long-term challenge. And I found, generally speaking, that most of the things I work on tend to take a long time. I mean, a good example of this is the interplanetary work, which started in 1998, and it's really just getting to fruition now, some over 20 years later. The internet took a long time as well. Bob Kahn and I started working on it in 1973. And it took until 1989 before any commercial internet service became available. And then, of course, World Wide Web shows up in 1991, and here it's 2020 now. And the internet is still only about half penetrated if you think about who has access to it. So I mean, we're talking 40 years or more. But it's worth it in some sense. These kinds of projects do take a long time, and you have to get a lot of people excited about it and willing to work on it, willing to invest in it. And so I think the biggest battle for most of the things I do is getting people excited about it and wanting to contribute to it. I try to tell all of my engineer friends and sometimes engineer employees that if you want to do something big, you have to learn how to sell your ideas. You have to be clear about what's motivating you, why it's important to do. Because if you don't get any help, you won't be able to do anything very big. And so the idea of being clear about your objectives and getting other people fired up about it is the best way to do something big. And I've been very fortunate to have convinced other people to help.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is purely out of my curiosity, but when you were working on the internet, was it called the internet at the time?
No, the beginnings of this project actually go all the way back to the late 1960s. The first network that was built based on packet switching principles of any scale was called ARPANET, which was named after the Advanced Research Projects Agency, which is part of the Defense Department. That project, the first node was installed at UCLA, where I was a graduate student. And so I was part of the team that was building the host-to-host protocols, the computer-based protocols that made the ARPANET useful. And then in 1973, I had moved up to Stanford University to join the faculty, and my colleague, Bob Kahn, who had worked on the ARPANET, had gone to ARPA and came out to my laboratory at Stanford and said, "We have a problem." I said, "What's the problem?" He said, "Well, we did the ARPANET project and it worked really well. But now we're looking at how you do use computers for what the military calls command and control. This is, managing logistics, dealing with battles, state information. We knew we were going to need voice, video, and data in order to make that work. But more important, the computers, if we were going to use them in this context, would have to be in mobile vehicles, in airplanes, and ships at sea. And you can't use dedicated telephone circuits to connect the airplanes up or the ships at sea or the mobile vehicles. So he had started working on a mobile packet radio system, which we're using that today when we carry our mobiles with us. But back then it was a brand new idea. Same is true for packet satellite, which is another way of sharing satellite resources. So we had these three networks: ARPANET, packet radio net, packet satellite net, but they were all different. They were all packet switch, but they were all different. We said, well, how are we going to hook them together? And we called it internetworking at the time. Then so we published a paper in 1974 describing what this thing would look like. It was called a Protocol for Packet Network Intercommunication was the title. Then I spent the entire year of 1974 with my graduate students doing detailed design of the TCP protocol. And at the end of the year, we published a document describing it in detail, and we used the word internet in that document. It was an internet transmission control protocol because internet working just took too long to say. So that's the first use of the word internet was in that document. It was a RFC, request for comments, number 675, published in December of 1974.
Wow, that's so cool. Yeah. So fascinating. Oh my gosh. This inspiring interview with Dr. Vint Cerf continues in part 2.